Today on Locked On Knicks, we break down the Knicks' defensive struggles. Who's actually to blame? We're going to tell you.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen each and every day. And the Knicks offense has been the second best in basketball this entire season. They were the first best, and then a certain game happened 2 nights ago. We don't have to talk about that anymore. The defense is arguably what's to blame for them not being a great team so far this year. We're going to tell you why the defense has not been very good and how it could potentially get better. But before we do that, I want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up for free at robinhood.com/gold. We also want to remind you that your favorite podcast now has a newsletter. That's right. We're introducing the Locked On Knicks daily newsletter, your one-stop shop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. So your first listen is this podcast. Your second listen is actually written. All you have to do is sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. I cannot emphasize that one word enough. It's totally free. You get writing from us. You get writing from our team of national writers. You get the best fantasy basketball updates every day from Josh Lloyd. It is just the total package. That's lockedondaily.com, and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Knicks newsletter. But who's talking to you? I'm Gavin Schall. I'm the Saturday host of the Locked On NBA podcast. He is Alex Wolf, editor-in-chief of The Strickland. Check them out on all forms of social media at thestrict.land for the best Knicks coverage on the web, along with this podcast, of course. And if you want to do us a favor, please subscribe wherever you are listening. Leave a 5-star review. Leave a comment. Tell us why you think the Knicks defense has sucked this year. But Alex, I'm going to leave this to you. We threw together a ton of stats, and we're going to give each one some context and maybe just how important we think it is to the Knicks defense struggling so far this year.
Yeah, so may as well just start in the most basic stat that, or at least for those that are, into digging through basketball stats, the most basic stat would be offensive rating or defensive rating, which is basically a rating of what the team would give up per 100 possessions in the NBA, for those that are not familiar with it, which is just a nice, easy way to adjust for pace and, just show in a vacuum what every single team, gives up any given game or any given 100 possessions, which is, a nice way to even the playing field rather than just looking at per game numbers when some teams play faster or slower than other teams and, give up more or less per possession and all that. This is an easier way to look at it. So the Knicks currently are 17th in the NBA in defensive rating at 113.7 points per 100 possessions. As you noted in our prep document here, they are a mere point away from being 13th in the league and a point away from being 21st in the league. So sort of vastly different narratives there. If they're 1 point in the good or 1 point in the bad further. As it stands right now, slightly below average at 17th in the NBA. Not exactly where we wanted them to be, I think, going into the season. But I think we both agreed that this team would have to also be at least top half in the league in defensive rating, if not top 10 probably, or flirting with top 10 if they're going to be truly like contender status. If you have that good of an offense, you can make up for lacking a bit on defense, but I think that they needed to be better than certainly what they are now if they want to be a true contender in the league. And as we've seen, they're now 5 games over 500, they're good enough. They're doing well and having some games where they completely blow teams out, having other games where they frustratingly, if the offense isn't working, can't really do enough to squeak out a game. And I think that was sort of the difference with past year Knicks teams. And, you wrote it down here, and I think I agree. Losing Isaiah Hartenstein was going to be a big deal. But I think that maybe we underestimated just how big of a deal it would be. Now, maybe that gets mitigated a little bit once Precious Achiuwa gets fully reintegrated and playing as well as he possibly can. or especially once Mitchell Robinson comes back and gets his legs back under him. But as of right now, B-Ball Index has Isaiah Hartenstein rated as the 7th most impactful defender in the league right now.
Or sorry, that was last season. He was the
excuse me, in basketball last season, which is not an easy stat to replace. But I'll leave it to you to break down some of the better and worst lineups that have come out so far, because we are able to distill the defensive rating numbers down to who's on the floor at any given time as well.
Yeah, I just want to note, because this surprised me. I was just looking it up while we were talking. So the Knicks, they're 17th in the NBA, 113.7 points allowed per 100 possessions. But I just want to emphasize just how thin the margins are. Last season, the Knicks were 9th. They were allowing 112.4. So they're only 1.3 points per 100 possessions worse, which is nothing, right? That's less than a shot per game. That could be a free throw or per 100 possessions, right? A shot, a free throw per 100 possessions. So they are not playing dramatically worse defense than last year.
It also just goes to show, like, though, in relation to the league, that scoring just seems to be way up this year in the aggregate too, for sure.
Well, isn't it the opposite? Because like the defensive rating is not that much worse, but it's only down a little.
Well, I think it goes to show that, like, the worst, or yeah, I guess that's true. I guess maybe it means that the overall scoring is down. I don't know. I just know that it seems like offense is once again taking another leap in the NBA this year.
Yeah, I guess this just seems to indicate which really surprised me, because the trend has been like last year, the last 2 years, the leaps have been gargantuan. And I guess for whatever reason, it hasn't been as much this year. And that's indicative of that. But anyways, this is maybe a full episode in and of itself. Like, I'm kind of struggling to feel like, all right, so then why does it feel like there's so much worse? And it might be like, I think the one thing you could look into is like perhaps they're playing at a faster pace this season, so they're scoring more, and like their offensive numbers a little inflated and their defensive numbers a little bit inflated in a negative way. And obviously, to your point, defensive rating takes that into account and adjusts for that. So maybe that's why the defense is not actually that much worse than it is a year ago. I did, however, pull up the January numbers, because I think we've often been comparing this group to the best version of last year's team, which, to be fair, didn't even include Mitchell Robinson last January, but the healthiest version, the most complete version of last season's team we saw. And that group over the month of January, again, small sample size, allowed only 104 points per 100 possessions. And then in the playoffs, the Knicks, I could pull it up right now, but I remember them being very dominant in the playoffs. And my memory was ultimately a little off the mark, because according to this, the Knicks allowed, because the Pacers blew them up. They allowed 120.6. They were pretty dominant against Philadelphia. They were not very dominant against Indiana, and their rating went way down. But the point is, we saw this team play dominant defense, right? In January, only allowing 104 points per 100 possessions against the Sixers in the first round of the playoffs, where they were allowing something like 100 points per 100 possessions. It tells you just how disastrous that Pacers series was, that the final number was that low. Anyways, to fast forward to this year, to your point, Hartenstein, not only B-Ball Index, but like a number of different all-inclusive rate stats, was considered a top defender. I remember there was one, I was trying to find it, I couldn't before we recorded today, where he was like second in the NBA as a defender. Like, Isaiah Hartenstein was just covered up a lot of different stuff. And I think as much as like OG transformed this team, it was the combination of OG on the perimeter and Isaiah inside, and then when he got healthy, Mitch inside, that really made this team great defensively. And as we'll get to, Deuce on the perimeter, because the biggest thing I noticed is that there wasn't really a lot of variance depending on who was in. We can get into the individual numbers as we go along, but basically, no matter who you sub in, the Knicks defense doesn't get that much better or worse. Like the starters, I expected the number to be horrible. They allow 114.7 points per 100 possessions, right? That's only one worse than the team as a whole. But generally, when you put Deuce McBride in, things get a lot better. When you have Sims in for Cat and Deuce in for Hart, the team allows just 100 points per 100 possessions. A lineup of Payne, McBride, Hart, Bridges, Cat allows just 108, which would be close to the best defense in basketball. A lineup of Brunson, Deuce, Hart, OG, Cat allows just 96 per 100 possession, which would easily be the best in basketball. The common denominator seen all those lineups is Deuce McBride is in. And it doesn't really matter which wing is out. Like, even when OG's off the floor, they've been really, really good. But generally, Deuce and OG together equals really good defense. Sims in for Cat, generally equals pretty good defense, which I think is encouraging because I think we're both pretty sure that Mitchell Robinson can provide a facsimile of what Jericho Sims does, if not do even better than him.
Yeah, I mean,
I know your opinion on it, but I'm saying that is one number that indicates Sims has had a pretty good impact relative to Cat.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that maybe some of that also is just bench units,
Sure.
the impact
100%.
of having Deuce out there, but also the short rotation that the Knicks have been running, where typically with that bench unit, they're still going to have like OG and possibly Mikal out there also. So I think there are some factors that add into that. That said, again, I think Sims has done better than I expected him to do this year. I think recently my opinion has been coming back down on him, unfortunately. But all in all, yeah, the numbers certainly suggest that they do get better with him. But I think that Deuce makes a huge difference. I mean, I think maybe one lesson that we can take away as far as the defense too is that I think that it does make a huge difference having Deuce out there from the perspective of not having Brunson out there. And that's not a knock on Brunson. I don't think that his defense has been like demonstrably worse this year or anything. But I do think that once you insert Deuce in that lineup, and then we're seeing like there's still enough playmaking between Deuce and like Josh Hart, who's usually still staying out there, and Campaign, who comes out as well and is a pretty dogged defender with Deuce there. Certainly, again, a little more impactful like on the ball than like a Brunson is. That maybe that's where we're seeing some of that leap too, where once you have Payne and Deuce, and as you highlighted, like the even with Cat out there, like the one lineup, Payne, McBride, Hart, Bridges, and Cat is still allowing a solid like 6 points per 100 less than the regular lineup. I think having that little bit of extra point of attack defense and not having to leverage out like say a Mikal Bridges at the point of attack like that is helpful. Although, as we'll get to later in the show, like the Mikal Bridges numbers are not exactly comforting. Although maybe some of that again has to do with the fact that he's being tasked with being the point of attack defender rather than the help defender that gets to just kind of whip all around the court and play free safety, which is kind of more what OG's been allowed to do, which has led to a career year pretty much across the board for him in defensive numbers. So there's still a lot more to get into, but I think next segment we'll get into the rebounding and the turnover rate. And then after that, start getting into some of the more granular individual player numbers that have contributed to the defense this year. So we'll get into that in just a moment.
But first, we want to tell you about our newest friends here at Locked On over at Robinhood Gold. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. All right, what's up, guys? We're back on Locked On Knicks, continuing to break down why we've been disappointed in the Knicks defense so far. So here's an interesting one. The Hawks game was obviously incredibly frustrating from an offensive rebounding standpoint. Atlanta got 22. And to me, like my feeling, my eye test has been that that's been kind of a consistent theme for the Knicks, that they're not able to protect the defensive glass as well as they were a year ago. The numbers don't really necessarily back that up. They're first in the league in contested defensive rebound percentage. So basically any rebound that's in play for both teams, the Knicks have been better than anyone else in the league in getting to. That to me is a Karl-Anthony Towns stat where we've just seen him consistently, I think maybe take some of the critiques of his physicality to heart and just be like a beast. Like when he's in the vicinity of the ball, it feels like he's winning it every single time, catching it high, like sticking two elbows out, like using his girth. Like he's been great in that capacity. Josh Hart has also been an excellent rebounder. Just for context, Hart is a 100th percentile defensive rebounder for his position. Cat is a 99th percentile defensive rebounder for his position, while no one else in the starting lineup is above average. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Knicks are 15th in overall defensive rebounding percentage. Last season, they were 17th. So they're actually like not any worse than they were a year ago, which is a little shocking to me. And I want to dive a little deeper into the numbers. One clear point is that they are quite a bit worse in terms of offensive rebounding. And they're only slightly worse in terms of offensive rebounding allowed. This year, they're 12th. Last season, they were 9th. But I think I'm maybe remembering just how dominant they were on the offensive glass in general and translating it to the defensive end. But I do think that's a telling stat that Hart is so good, Cat is so good, and basically everyone else has sucked outside of Jericho Sims at rebounding the basketball. So maybe the moments those guys are off the floor, all those guys aren't around, the Knicks have just really, really struggled to get the ball. And if that could be more of a collective stat, that would make a big difference. I'm going to do one little jump ahead and tell you who is maybe chief to blame amongst that. And I would go to Mikal Bridges, whose rebounding rate of defensive rebounding rate of 7.1% is first percentile. That is not the best. That is the worst in the NBA for a guy who's also pretty much the worst at getting to the rim, who's pretty much was the worst at wing threes. Obviously, has gotten a little better there. That is just another area that he has really let the Knicks down this year and suggestive of an overall lack of physicality in his game.
Yeah, that I was literally about to bring up the same thing, after you said the rebound rate of like, I guess a little unsurprising for the guy that is not going to the rim at all this year. And I don't know what the root cause of both those issues are. If it's just that he's trying to keep that Iron Man streak alive and trying to protect the body, by not going after the rebounds and not getting to the rim as much. I don't know, but either way, that is a spot that they need more production out of. OG has been, I believe, just sort of average at getting rebounds as well. So getting a little more out of him might be helpful. But, certainly when OG is the guy that is being tasked with flying around to get the steals and the blocks and everything else, and we'll get to how good his numbers have been in that regard soon, it makes it a little harder then to try to get the steal, try to get the block, and then also be the guy in the trenches getting the hard box out in there too. And speaking of guys that really need to protect their body, I think OG is chief among those guys, and maybe should be avoiding the most physical scenarios. Although maybe you could say that about Cat too, and yet he's throwing his body around with reckless abandon.
Yeah, just real quick to that point, could we say as like an all-inclusive theory here, this is maybe indicative of a defense that's out of position, because as that contested rebound stat indicates, when they're in position, they get the rebound. They're just flying around and helping so much. And you see it so often with Cat where he gets a contest and then no one is there to actually box out Cat's man. Like that kind of feels like the theme to me.
Yeah, I think so too. And, I think you could also explain the fact that they're slightly better in defensive rebounds, overall defensive rebounding percentage this year. Relative to the rest of the league is maybe just by the fact that they're winning around the margins like that, with everything that is contested, going and getting that, but not able to get just be in position for all the rebounds. And because this stat too, also, you could also be like, oh, they're, maybe it's just dependent on how many rebounds are available or whatever, but it's not. Like these stats are all encompassing, like, they're just taking a percentage of everything, which, shows there must be a problem there somewhere. I think that in general, I think that Mitch will help to some degree, although he mostly helps on the offensive rebounding side of things. I mean, though I will say he has had an outsized effect, I think, on their defensive rebounding in the past too, just by being the guy that is always putting a body into somebody. And we used to see that Julius Randle was a really high level defensive rebounder, because of the fact that Mitch always had a body on someone and wouldn't necessarily get that defensive rebound and would get more on the offensive end, but would free up, would basically say, well, the opposing team center is out of the equation in a defensive rebounding scenario, which would allow a Josh Hart or a Julius Randle to fly in there. And maybe that eventually helps Cat out as well. And, instead of averaging like 13 rebounds a game, we start seeing Cat averaging 15 to 17 down the stretch if he gets consistent minutes with Mitch. just because of the effect that Mitch can have with that crazy box out presence. So we'll see. I think Mitch can definitely help on both ends as far as rebounding, but I think that his impact on the defensive rebounding is sometimes a little understated. And that he actually adds quite a bit to that as well. But let's talk about turnovers too. So turnover rate, despite OG Anunoby having a really elite run in this category with the stocks that he's producing, he's had something like, I think, at least 4 in many of his recent games, like 4 out of his last 6 or something.
Yeah.
There's the Knicks still as a team are just 26th in forced turnover rate this season. They were 21st last season, so it's never been a particularly strong suit for them, which is kind of weird considering the amount of wing talent that they have right now. They lost Donte DiVincenzo, who had a really good steal percentage last year, 2%, which was good for 90th percentile. But he was more of the sort of player that was generating those sort of plays than Mikal, ironically, even though that's sort of supposed to be Mikal's calling card. Also, Isaiah Hartenstein had a steal rate of 2% as well. So that's 2 really high steal generating guys, both of them 90th percentile for their position. Cat's been pretty good this year in that. So that has sort of been mitigated a bit. But I'll once again jump ahead to the Mikal numbers a little bit. He's coming in at 1.2% steal percentage this year, which is his career low from last season and a full point lower than his career best in Phoenix. So there was a version of Mikal that was producing steals at that Donte DiVincenzo from last year rate of 2% or more. That version just does not exist right now. And he has gone down pretty much every year of his career, just going on a straight downward trajectory. Like that 2.2% was his rookie year, but he did hover around 2% for a long time with Phoenix, and then has just gradually gone down and down and down. Seems like he's getting his hand on the ball less. Now, if I wanted to defend him a little bit, I might say, that maybe has something to do with the fact that he is working as the point of attack defender, which makes it a little harder to get your hand on a ball like that than if you're just sort of playing safety and playing, against one of the other wing players or just a perimeter shooter, which is where OG finds himself a lot. But all in all, still pretty disappointing to see Mikal, like in a year where we thought, hey, he should be able to kind of reclaim his old self a little bit and get back to what he did on Phoenix. He's sort of just on offense regressed a decent amount, beyond where he was last year as like a number 1 scorer on Brooklyn, but then also not regressed as a defender, but kind of held steady at the coasting level that he was at on Brooklyn, where he didn't really have anything to play for, which we were thinking, and I'm sure the Knicks were thinking, would change this year, and unfortunately hasn't.
Yeah, we will have a little more on him. I think he is kind of the root cause, and I think the Knicks were pretty much relying on him to hold this defense together, and he has not been able to do so far. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Karl-Anthony Towns rebounding, and rim protection. We will talk about the Knicks 3-point defense. All that and more in just a sec here on Locked On Knicks.
But first, we got to let you know about our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get 115 bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. May I suggest in my Jets hater segment of the week, as a Jets fan, I could not possibly hate this team more right now. They are currently somehow against all odds, again, a favorite in a game. They are 3.5-point favorites over the Jacksonville Jaguars, who I know are also without their starting quarterback, and they have their backs against the wall. They have not exactly been good. And yet I believe in actually, you know what? Never mind. This is an opportunity for the Jets to potentially move their draft positioning up if they lose. And that's why I am for sure that they are going to win, and they're going to cover, and they're probably going to win by like 3 touchdowns. So never mind. Let me throw out what I was about to say. I was going to say the Jets can find a way to lose because they always do. But the Jets, when given an opportunity to help themselves in the draft positioning and potentially set themselves up to get their new quarterback and everything else, they have never not dropped the ball. in that category. So bet the Jets to win. That is almost guaranteed money because, any game that doesn't matter, they'll lose. But any game that could matter for draft positioning, they will win that game and they'll win it decisively. They're great at that. So bet the Jets. Anyway, that's FanDuel.com. You can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Gavin, we're back in to keep talking through the Knicks' defensive issues. Maybe we just get into the players at this point because I think that's where we've kind of been trending towards anyway. And maybe we talk about something positive real quick, just amongst this sea of negativity, and talk about OG Anunoby before we get back into Mikal Bridges and restate some of the things that we've kind of already gone over with him. But OG Anunoby has the highest contested shots per game in the NBA for a non-center with 8 per game this season. He's actually tied with Karl-Anthony Towns. It's somewhere around like 18th or so in the league. I think when I was looking, I didn't feel like on NBA stats, they don't give you nice little numbers on the side. So you just have to manually sit there and count them, which is annoying. So I didn't feel like
frustrating. Adam Silver, step up. Come on.
I know. They do a lot of great things with NBA stats. They offer us a lot of really good stats for free, but that is one thing that's missing. It's just little numbers on the side. It would make life so much easier.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. At any rate, I did count all the way down the list and make sure that there were no other wing players ahead of him. There are not. He is the highest contested shots per game in the NBA for a non-center, 8 per game. All the other players above him are all centers because they're obviously getting players funneled into them and contesting shots all game. OG Anunoby has taken on a big onus of that by himself. He also has a block percentage of 1.7%, which is the highest of his career. That's per cleaning the glass. So that is a great number. And then on the other part of defense, the generating steals and everything, he has 3.7 deflections per game, which is 5th in the NBA. And he has a steal percentage of 1.9%. Again, that around 2% is kind of like the elite steal percentage number. Like that's where if you can hit around there, you're doing really good for yourself. So 1.9% isn't the highest of his career. He has cleared 2% in steal percentage before. And yet it's very impressive when you consider the fact that he is also the top shot contester of any non-center in the NBA and also has a higher block percentage than any point in his career. The fact that he's still holding strong at an elite level in steal forcing as well just goes to show that like when he's not contesting shots and getting blocks, he is still playing the passing lanes like a demon. And then all in all, NBA Stats has this number available to show what players are shooting against any given player relative to what they shoot normally. And all in all, players are shooting 1.9% worse when guarded by OG Anunoby per NBA Stats. So maybe this is just there's not even too much more to say other than that about OG, but all in all, just a great year so far for him. He has made a real case, I think, for Defensive Player of the Year votes. Just the fact that the Knicks defense is at all as good as it is, I think has a lot to do with OG Anunoby. The fact that he is just playing like such a demon defensively, the fact that he is staying healthy, I think is enormous. And the fact that he has not missed a game yet, huge for this team. And hopefully that continues because they really need everything that he gives them on a nightly basis.
Yeah, I think that is probably the single most concerning aspect of the Knicks defensive rating number and why it feels worse than last year, even though it's not that much worse than last year. They got to that number despite OG only playing in something like 23 games for them, and he's already played in 25 games for them this season. So that's the worrying part, right? Like they've been a little worse than last year despite having OG Anunoby. Every single game when last season they had, arguably to your point, like a top 5 defender in the NBA for only a quarter of the season. So maybe that's where I'd zoom in and say, all right, the number's similar, but it doesn't feel similar. And it's because when OG was on the court last year, they were way better than what that final number was. So I think we might have just solved that one. I do want to quickly say right before running through some of the final numbers. A point made by Joff, aka Frank Barrett on Twitter, co-host of the Hot Hand Theory. He was talking about OG's body language really just looking bad towards the end of that Hawks game. And he said, kind of looked like a guy who's tired of like saving the day every single time. He's been asked to put out just so many fires this season. And I think that's like the way this falls apart and gets even worse is if OG, like at a certain point, and I don't think he's going to say screw this because he's making $200 million for that reason. But at some point, some of the pressure has to be taken off him. Ideally, it would be from Mikal Bridges. You already mentioned his steal rate, a career low. It's gone down literally every single year of his career, which to me is extremely disheartening. The deflections are not good. He's around 150th in the league. To your point, some of that's the role. Some of that is just for whatever reason, like his defensive activity has gone down from earlier in his career. I mentioned the rebounding is pretty much the worst for wings in the NBA. Another indicator, the fact that he's just totally lacked physicality on defense, 1.5% foul rate. That is 97th percentile in the NBA. So he's elite at not fouling. If I felt like he was playing awesome defense, that would be an incredible number. But to me, it's indicative of the fact that guys are constantly getting separation from him, right? And occasionally he's playing, like he's having good screen navigation, but even when he does, like he's chasing, and that to some extent is just the nature of defense against the best point guards in the league. You are trying to chase someone like Trae Young off the 3-point line, but too many times he hasn't been close. He hasn't provided a legit backside contest, which is what he was supposed to be great at. Watch OG Anunoby, watch Derek White, watch Drew Holiday. Those guys are navigating screens and then forcing tough shots. Mikal is consistently failing in that area. And he's just like maybe he doesn't want to get hurt. Maybe that's the point. But I think that's what we felt all year. That's where we've been frustrated. The guy does not want to be touched. And you cannot play great NBA basketball if you're not willing to get your hands dirty a little bit. So that to me is actually a really damning number for Mikal Bridges this season.
Yeah, I'm with you. And actually, like it kind of goes to like, you run into this, I feel like a lot. Like I know that my like rec league basketball coach when I was like a kid used to say this to me because I was, playing as the big. He would always be like, I want you to foul like 4 times a game. Like there's something to be said for if you're a defensive presence, you want them to feel you. And so being that low again, to your point, if he was playing perfect like lockdown defense and had that low of a foul percentage, great. That means that he's players are shooting way worse against him. He's not fouling them. Like that's amazing. But the reality is that players are getting by him and then he's not making them feel him. And, you would hope that you don't want him to go crazy and start getting 6 fouls per, 36 minutes or whatever, considering the amount that the Knicks need him on the floor. And maybe that's also part of his rationale is like, oh, I'm playing like 37 minutes a game. They need me for all those minutes, so I can't get in foul trouble and blah, blah, blah. But what ends up happening is the reverse, where it's just like he's always playing like he has 5 fouls. Yeah. And you can't play that way. Like you need to make players feel you a little bit. And we even see that with OG. Like I think OG, I didn't pull his foul rate number, but it's not crazy low. I think he's right around the middle of the pack, and that's fine because you want him to make guys feel him sometimes. You want to strategically commit fouls every once in a while. And there is value to that. And I feel like we're not seeing that out of Mikal. Like, I just think in general, almost all of my complaints this year, defensively and offensively from him, just come from him not wanting to be physical at all on either end. And I think that needs to change on defense and then needs to change on offense. And even if that means like, the other thing that we didn't really pull numbers on here, but that is abundantly obvious to the eye test is he's not getting around screens as much either. There's some games where he just seems allergic to getting around a screen. And that is one of the more physical things you can do on defense. And, we need to see improvement out of all those things, especially if he's going to continue playing the huge minutes that he does. But, I think more often than not, we're going to start seeing him not close games, which Tibbs has already gone to a number of times this year, just because if he's not giving you the level of defense you expect from him, and he's not playing physical on offense and everything else, then you're kind of screwed with him on the floor. And that all especially does not translate well to potential playoff basketball too, where things just get ratcheted up to, 1,000 on the intensity scale. So hopefully that's something that he continues to work on. I think he's done better on offense, at least the last few games, excuse me, of getting inside and, trying to find layups and stuff, even if they're like not super contested, but hopefully we just continue to see him try to play a little more physical as the year goes on. Just a few last guys real quick to get into. Jalen Brunson, I just had one quick stat. 0.4 charges drawn per year or this year per game, which is 5th in the league. He was at 0.45 last year, which was good for 3rd in the league. I mean, not a huge difference there, but I thought anecdotally, I thought this number would be lower. It just feels like he's not getting as many of those calls this year, but good to see, I guess, that roughly he's still doing about what we expect, like almost half a charge per game, 1 charge every 2 games or so. So it's good to see that number is still mostly intact for him.
Yeah, and then Josh Hart. This was maybe the stat that stood out to me the most when looking at the net rating numbers. Opponents shoot 5.2% better when he's on the floor. That's 6th percentile in the NBA, close to a career high steal rate. So he's still making things happen. But I am going to pay closer attention to his man-to-man defense because I haven't really noticed him as the weak point, but maybe sometimes he has been, and I've been wrong about that. And he's definitely been one of the guys who's been, when I say a lot of nights guys are overhelping, and I know to some extent that's just what Tom Thibodeau wants to do, and he wants to protect the paint, protect Cat at the expense of allowing some threes, which we can wrap up with. I have some final numbers on those. Yeah, that it could just be indicative of that. Anyways, Alex, I'll leave it to you real quick to go through Karl-Anthony Towns, because I think he was the kind of person we were looking to when we said, all right, who's the human pinata we're going to beat up for the Knicks defensive struggles? And I think partially it's because the Knicks compensate a lot for his weaknesses, but of late he's been playing better defense.
Yeah, I think things have really started to come around for Cat. I mean, famously, there was a stat early in the season. I didn't go back and pull like his first 10 game numbers or anything, but the stat earlier in the season was like players were shooting like 80% at the rim against him or whatever, which is just awful. And yet things have been looking up lately. So the defense is 1.8 points better when he's on the floor. So that's, first off, maybe a little surprising, but maybe not. I don't know. It's like what you have to look at what the options are on the floor, but also just like we saw the personnel, when things change from the starters to a slightly modified version with a little more perimeter defense, it actually makes him look quite a bit better on the interior defense. So maybe not totally surprising to see that they're actually better on defense with him on the floor versus without. And then inside of 6 feet, right now, the number for the full season is at players shooting 67.9% against him inside of 6 feet, which is 5.6% better than you would expect. And overall for the season, players are shooting 4.6% better than expected against him in all defensive scenarios. However, over his last 10 games, which is a pretty good sample, they're shooting 61.7% at the rim, which is about 0.5% less than expected, and only 2% better overall against him than expected. So I think that's pretty solid, because that also for bigs, you usually want to just look for that rim number because that's the most important. So they're basically at their average, but 0.5% worse, still worse technically. But the overall number maybe is just indicative of, if he gets caught on a switch or something, that's a hard situation for a big to be in. So sometimes you see that number where players are shooting overall a little better against a center, just because if they get drawn out to the perimeter or whatever, it's tougher for them to keep up. But all in all, numbers trending in the right direction lately, which is good. Also his foul percentage, I know we were just harping on it the other day because it kind of hurt the Knicks against the Hawks, but all in all, his foul percentage is right around his career average at 3.4%. But it actually puts him in a lower percentile than usual. So he's 53rd percentile among bigs right now, when usually he's in the 65th percentile or higher in foul percentage. So I guess what that says is big man fouls are just overall up this year. And he's hanging out at the same rate. So I guess that's good. If bigs are being called for fouls more this year, and yet, or just other bigs are fouling more, and Cat is still just kind of hanging out at where he's always been for his career. Cool, I guess. I mean, I still wish he would show a little more discipline sometimes, but all in all, he's not harming them demonstrably, or at least not more than usual in that category. And so I think it's been mostly livable, with some occasional exceptions, like the game the other day being one of them.
Yeah, and again, I think the eye test backs up that he's been just substantially better the last 10 games. I do think, again, part of it is that the Knicks have gone above and beyond to make things easier on him and provide him with help. And again, that is not to say like it's clear he's more physical. He's making contact at the rim much better. Like, I don't have a ton of complaints about Cat right now. All I will say is, like, where you see that number play out is the Knicks are 21st in the NBA in threes allowed per game. They're 20th in 3-point percentage. They were 12th in threes allowed per game last season. And again, that's with OG missing a lot of time. And in terms of 3-point percentage allowed, they were 21st last year. So they were pretty similar. So basically, they're allowing more threes. They're allowing teams to shoot slightly worse from three this year. But I want to keep looking at that number because to me, that is sort of the weakness of the defense right now. And even though they're 20th, which is bad, but not super bad, obviously threes have an outsized impact. Everyone knows that. So that is kind of the number I'm looking for going forward. I think if we were to have a general theme here, it's, again, they are consistently out of position. And I think that starts at point of attack, and that starts with Mikal Bridges. And I'm curious because where they've defended better lately is having Towns up at the level, him being more aggressive. That makes Mikal's life a lot easier. And the other thing they've found success with is having OG guard the other team's best player. So he's the guy at point of attack. Mikal can fly around. To your point earlier, that was the role in Phoenix where he almost won Defensive Player of the Year. It wasn't because he was some lockdown one-on-one guy. He's never totally been that. So I think there are some obvious adjustments the Knicks can make that'll make them slightly better on the margins. We'll just have to see going forward if they employ them. But until then, he's Alex Wolf. I'm Gavin Schall. We hope you enjoy your Friday. We hope you enjoy your weekend. We'll be back very soon to talk to you on Locked On Knicks.